Welcome to Grief Sucks Life After Loss, where we talk all things grief. Thanks for being with us today, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome, Jeanette. Thanks for being here with us today.
I am super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Linda. It's such a amazing opportunity that you're giving people like me.
Well, you have a different kind of story to tell us today. You are going through grief in a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you being here to tell your story. If you want to jump in and tell us about you.
Yeah. So when you first reached out to me, I automatically thought about a grief experience that I had in December, which is it's about 6 months ago. Girl, I don't even know what month it is. It
I
was
get
almost
it.
and I will get there, but in order for people to understand why that was such a horrible grief experience for me, I want to go back to something that I have only recently realized, which is I've really been grieving since I was a child. And the reason I say that is that when I was 8 years old in 1984, my mom was diagnosed with her first illness of what would become many. And from that time on, so that was a really traumatic experience for me because everything was fine. It was just me and my mom. She got married to my stepdad. And the next thing I know, she's in the hospital for 6 months. I'm staying with relatives. It was chaotic. My circumstance at my relative's house was not always as safe as it needed to be. So there were issues there. And so it was just a very traumatic time in my life. And then, mom comes home from the hospital and I, move in with my mom that was different than I knew her before and the
Hmm.
stranger who was now my stepdad. And I mean, I did know him, but this was a new circumstance for us all.
Hmm.
And none of us knew what we were doing. And we were all just trying to figure it out. I can see that now as an adult looking back. As a child, all I knew and all I felt was, this is not comfortable. This doesn't feel like a safe. I didn't feel like I was going to be hurt in any way, but like it didn't feel safe. Like you go home, like everybody's going to, be there for me. And that really wasn't the way I felt because when I was with my parents, it was all about taking care of my mom. So, like,
Yeah.
what did mom need? What did mom do? And at first, it was very much like when people ask me about being a caregiver as a child, it's like, well, obviously, I didn't know I was a caregiver. I just thought I was being a good helper, I was being a good daughter.
Right.
Like, your parents ask you to do something, you do it, whether it's take out the trash or help me count out these pills to make sure I have enough and not too many. Like that's the
Right.
what I did. I also took out the trash. So that's kind of how I grew up is just like, you know, I was I went to school, I had friends, things like that, but I also had this like huge responsibility on my shoulders and this looming idea in my head that if I didn't help take care of my mom, she might die.
That's rough.
And so, like I said, looking back, I don't know if anybody ever sat me down and said, Jeanette, it's your responsibility to keep your mom alive. But that is how I perceived my role is my mom, needs my help. I'm going to be a good girl. And also I understand that things that stress her out, what might make her worse, because her disease is exacerbated by stress, as most autoimmune diseases are. Therefore, it was like, well, I have to make perfect grades and I can't say, I can't be disobedient because what kind of, that's not just being a bad girl, that's like being a killer.
Right.
And so I had this hyper awareness of my role in my mom's life, and I felt this tremendous responsibility for it at a young age. And then I did have a period of time where I did go to school. She was fairly stable during that time. My stepdad was still around. I was able to go to college. I got married. Now I did live with them before I got married, so I'm sure there was still, but like I said, she was able to drive a car. She was managing
Hmm.
her own medications at this point, kind of thing. And so for a period of time, I had a sense of normalcy. But what I realize now is I really had been through a decades long traumatic experience of if your mom gets sick, she could die situation going on. And that made me pretty reactive to everything. And so like now looking back on, like my college days, my dating life, it's like not the most, I didn't have the most healthy coping skills. I was a people pleaser. I was
Hmm.
make sure everybody's happy, make sure everybody else has what they need, like how can I, I want to be super convenient, don't want to cause any problems for anybody because that's how I grew up. Like, don't cause
Right.
any problems because it could kill your mom. It's just, like this idea. And so that kind of bled its way into my life, certainly. But then, my husband and I have children. And then pretty close to after we had our kids, my mom's health, started to slowly deteriorate. Now, at first, it was not even something that you would register on your radar. It would be just like, oh, she needs me to, you know, drop off a gallon of milk, or she needs, she wants me to go to the doctor with her.
Hmm.
It didn't register me that she like needed me to be there. And what started as normal just snowballed into when one day I'm realizing I have a full-time job, and it's not the full-time job I have, it's the job of caring for my mom, because it was a daily 7 days a week, not, it was no longer like swinging by every now and then. It was like a full on, like, if I'm not there, shit's going to go down. Like, just that's how it went. And so that in its own way brought on a different type of grief that I was experiencing and didn't realize it, because of course I was dealing with like the trauma of like the hyper awareness, like always having to be on and ready to go. Right.
Right.
So like I was dealing with that and I understood that. But what I've now is that I was also grieving like what I had already lost in the relationship that I wanted to have with my mom that I didn't anymore, because it wasn't like we were talking before you hit record, like, you and your daughter have like a friendship of sorts. And
Right.
then, which is kind of the way, my mom and I had always thought about our relationship, but really what was, and there was some of that certainly, but really what had happened is this total codependent relationship with her, where I was constantly like, you know, I can do it. I can do it. I can help. I can fix it. I can, and I was stepping in and stepping in and stepping in until I was drowning in my mom's
Hmm.
needs. And I was grieving what I no longer had with her, that connection. I didn't feel safe to tell her like when things were happening in my marriage or I was struggling with things personally. Usually you go
Because
to
you,
your mom, right? Like that's, ideally, and in a lot of cases you go to your mom with that, or you go to your dad with that. Well, I didn't have that. I didn't feel like I could do that. I didn't feel like I could burden my mom with that. So I was grieving that. I was grieving what my kids were losing and the type of grandmother that I knew. My kids love her and they know their granny, but she wasn't able to do what she had wanted to do for them. And I was grieving that. I just didn't know that I was grieving all of these things that I had lost and also that were never going to happen.
right.
And so when I, now as someone who is, when I work with caregivers, we have to acknowledge that like grief happens not just in the normal places we expect it. We expect to have our world rocked when we lose someone unexpectedly or when our beloved parent dies, right? We know that is going to be hard and heart-wrenching. What we don't expect is the grief that happens before, where we see it happen. We see what we're losing in as we're losing it. And in my case, it's happened over, probably the last 15, 20 years. I've watched my mom slowly decline and become less and less able to be, you know, the person that she wanted to be. And I haven't been able to have the relationship with her that I have wanted to have. And so that has been really hard and not always pretty, like not always sweet and sunshine. like in the idea, like, oh, poor, that's so sad. Yeah. And it's also really frustrating. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times when like my mom and I would get into it with each other. And I learned once I got into therapy that a lot of times my anger was really, it was really fear or grief. Like
Mhm.
I'm angry because I'm afraid that I'm going to lose her and we're not going to have this fight fixed. We're not going to figure this out yet. We're
Right.
having the same freaking fight, you know? And it's like, that is hard too, but it's also, I want people to hear that. Like if you're a caregiver like me, maybe it's your parents, but maybe it's your spouse. Maybe you're even caring for a child beyond just that parenting role. Maybe, you have a child that needs extra care. Well, when you are feeling that anger and that frustration, that may be grief. And it's okay to feel those feelings and process through them. So one of the reasons my caregiving role, in addition to my mom's health deteriorating, but one of the reasons my caregiving role ramped up over the last couple of decades is my mom and stepdad got divorced, which was also like a total cluster. It wasn't great, but I maintained.
Divorce never is.
Yeah, it's not fun. They did their best, but it's not, and it wasn't great. But I still maintained a relationship with my stepfather. I still consider him my stepfather. And so one of the things that happened, and this is where, to circle back to the beginning of our conversation, one of the most intense feelings of grief I have gone through, despite going through the work of understanding the grieving process that I've gone through over the past few decades. And of course, another thing to acknowledge is like grief isn't 24/7
Mm-mm.
and pulling your hair out all the time. Your life goes on and you have joyful moments and you have joyful seasons of your life but there's always going to be. I had a friend who lost their loved one, their mom, many years ago, and she said it doesn't go away, it just changes. One day you'll be minding your own business and then, the rest of it, you'll be sobbing your eyes out and then you'll be fine.
Yep.
Good to know ahead of time, so I know what to expect. But long story short, I had this relationship with my stepdad. I'm still caring for my mom. Over the last, 5 years, her deterioration just was rapid. So last year she had to go live in a nursing home, which was that was a whole other grieving process we had to go through. Her grieving her independence, which of course we, know that she actually lost way before she went into the nursing home. We just were pretending like she didn't lose it.
Yeah.
But she's in a nursing home. My stepdad, who was taking care of his mother last year in September, fell. He just had a fall and he hit his head and spine. And he called
Mm.
me from the emergency room and he was like, hey, fun fact, I'm in the emergency room. I'm fine. I did crack a few vertebrae, but I think I'll be all right. But can you bring me my phone charger? And so I was like, sure. And so in the middle of like going back and forth to see my mom at her nursing home, which was, we were still like getting our bearings there. I was going to see my dad in the hospital, my stepdad. And what we thought was going to be like a few, like some, maybe a surgery and some PT, and then he would eventually be back home. Whether or not he was able to take care of my grandmother, we weren't too concerned about, but we just were like, oh yeah, things will be fine. Turned into what we would learn would be, it became paralysis from his shoulders down. He had a head injury, and so a brain injury, spinal cord injury, and he would not recover from that. And so I watched that happen the same time my mom is adjusting to her new life in the nursing home with all the bumps that comes with that. And then in December, she went into the hospital. She was put on a ventilator. She was in the ICU. Not the first time this has happened, but still never super exciting times, very stressful.
Yeah.
And my stepdad went into hospice care.
Oh.
So the same week my mom was on the ventilator, my stepdad, and she was on the ventilator in one hospital. My stepdad passed away in a nursing home across town. And that gutted me. I could not wrap my head around the idea of possibly losing both of my parents
Mm-hmm.
at the same time and the impossibility of being with both of them. There was no way that, that would not happen. And then it turns out I wasn't able to be with my stepdad when he passed away, but I was able to see him and talk to him. But the grief that all I try to tell people is the world fell out from underneath, the earth fell out from underneath my feet. I quit my job immediately. I was like, I cannot even think about, I care about nothing right now. I cannot work. I had a front facing job, where I had to be in front of people. And I was like, yeah, that's
Not going to work out.
no. I ended up getting the flu, and then I couldn't be with my mom for a week because I had the flu. And so my body just shut down. It was like, no, we're done. And that flu was the best gift I could have ever gotten because it allowed me to not have to focus on my mom for a little bit so that I could grieve my stepfather. Because the day after my stepdad died, I was up at the hospital at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. to talk to the doctors for my mom. And then 2 days later I had the flu. So I learned that, grief, much like, it is an extreme form of stress. It is going to affect your body. Mm-hmm. It is okay, but I also, like I said, I just remember thinking, oh, I have the flu. Thank God I'm going to sleep. I'm checking out. I just want to, and I'm still off kilter in the world after the loss of my stepdad. I still feel like the world is slightly askew on its axis. It's not quite right. But also having to help my mom grieve the loss of what she was not able to do, which was she didn't want to get there was no getting back together, but healing that relationship with my stepdad which would have been something that she would have wanted to do. Helping her grieve through that has also pulled my own grief back out into the forefront so often. Yeah. And so that is what I'm going through now, is just this process of understanding all the different types of grief I'm experiencing and allowing that to happen without judging myself for it or beating myself up for not doing it faster or more. It's like I talk a lot about mindfulness and when I work with caregivers, so mindfulness and de-stress and relaxation and everything. And it's like, yeah, all those things, but yeah, it's still gonna be hard. Caregiving is still going to be hard. It's still going to be hard. You can sniff all the aromatherapy you want, and
it's still going to suck.
It's still going to suck. Yep. And that's okay. It's also, grief is one of those things that is one of the hardest things we as humans will go through. And I know there's studies out there. Other animals go through grief too. We know that. But as humans, we have to, and we'll go through it more than one time in our life. And I think also when we experience grief, you were talking about this before we hit record, you have this grief experience and then you try really hard to not have it again. You're like, I don't want anything to happen to anybody, and working through that so that you can allow your children to, get behind the wheel of a car.
You're half-assed.
Yeah,
and think you're normal, because I'm pretty confident my son's like, bitch, you fell off your rocker.
Yeah, right. So, there's that too. It's like, okay, well, I can't go through life, with bubble wrap around everyone around me or myself. I can't do that with myself. Yeah. I have to be willing to, allow myself to live and grow and move forward, and my children and my husband and my parents, because I do, my dad and, my father, who I also have a relationship with, and, my mom is still here. Right now we're going through a different level of grieving. We're entering into this anticipatory grief phase as she goes into palliative care now, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, or for anybody who's listening, palliative care is often confused with hospice, but it's a similar in the sense that it focuses on comfort, but it doesn't remove any treatments or medications that your loved one is on. They still get to, get curative treatments, whereas in hospice, they don't do that. So we're in this like in between now, which is precarious.
What are some kind of things that you have done? First, I think spending the time feeling your grief and
Mhm.
working through it is very important instead of just burying it and keep go, 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 go.
Mhm.
Because I know a lot of people do that. And I think me taking the time to actually feel it and work through it was huge.
Mhm.
Um, the grief is always there, but like you said, you do have good days, you do have good seasons, and the grief is less. But some days you may walk in a grocery store and see something that may remind you of your loved one and you break down in tears and you got to leave. Or
Right.
there's been times where I leave the house and I'm absolutely fine and I'll pull up somewhere and my anxiety kicks in. I'm like, nope, we got to go home. So it comes and goes, but taking that time to feel all of that.
Mhm.
And just like you said, you got the flu in the mix of all the chaos, but I'm a true believer that your body has ways
Yeah.
of telling you you need to sit the fuck down
Yep.
and you have to stop. Like it has ways to make you dead ass stop because if not, you wouldn't.
Right.
And stress is a silent killer as well.
Mhm.
So just taking that time and listening to your body because if not, it's going to make you lay down and take that break.
I was never so happy to get the flu in my life. Like I wasn't going to I was thinking to myself like if I can just get mom off the ventilator then I can, but it's like no, you don't know. We're not going to wait till then because who knows if that's even going to happen at that point. But yeah, I was like I just remember like calling my husband and being like it's official, I have the flu. I am no longer available. The end. And it was the best few days of my life, just like, I don't care. I'm taking NyQuil in the middle of the day,
Yeah. Yep.
whatever. It was, fun times, just, drinking the Gatorade and eating the crackers and all that stuff. Like, we don't do. We don't do anymore. So, yes. And I do think that, your body will quietly tell you what it needs.
Hmm.
And then if you don't listen, it will scream it at you.
Yep.
So I was thankful that in the midst of me not being able to hear the quiet, like you need a break, my body was like, nope, okay, fine. We're gonna give you the out.
Yep.
You don't have to ask permission. We're just gonna make it so nobody wants you around because you have the flu. How about that?
Yep. I truly believe that. So what are some things that you did to help you? I mean, obviously you have some years of going through different kind of griefs. Um, but what are some things that you did to kind of help you or are helping you through your mom's current situation?
So right now, what I'm doing to kind of get through this weird, she's not getting better, but she doesn't have a timeline in the same sense that somebody that has a cancer diagnosis might have they can give more of a timeline for you, your loved one when that
Hmm.
happens. We don't really have that because her disease is just different. But we do know that like she's just going to continue to get weaker and more sleepy. And that's how, so what I'm trying to do now is encourage her. She's a really great storyteller. Like that's part of her, like that's her jam. And so I record her telling stories and sometimes I'll take old pictures that we have and be like, tell me what's going on here in this old picture. And she'll tell me the story of Aunt so and so that went to the all girl secretary school in 1915 or whatever. So, like, and you hear all these stories of family members that, like, you would never know about and like times in history that are gone. And so that's one of the things we do. And then right now, I'm trying to get her because she's starting to be a little confused. And so
Hmm.
she's like, so is today the day I'm going to die? And I'm like, Mom, I don't know. So, like, that's
My
really,
grandma did that. She'd
yeah.
be like, "Well," she told, she would ask often. She's like, "So is it going to be today?"
Yeah.
And then one day, my cousin walked in. She was like, "Hey, I'm dying today." I was like, "No, you're not." I'm like, nobody told you that.
Yeah, so like that, we deal with that a lot where she's like, so when is the funeral home coming? You know, like it's really, and so it can be it's hilarious, but also kind of like sad. You know, you're like, the
Yeah.
funeral home won't come, you won't care when they come because you won't be, you know, but also it's
But
probably not going to be today. I can't tell you when, but it's probably not going to be today because you're talking to me right now.
but at the same time, I feel like when they're discussing that they're ready.
Yeah.
They're just waiting.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is like, so while we're waiting, who do you want to call on the phone today? Or who do you want me to call and see if they'll come for a
Mhm.
visit, you know, that kind of stuff. And so we try to do that. And then, you know, what's been really good for me too is to hear her as she, like you say, as she's coming to acceptance and understanding, she's starting to say things that I have needed to hear personally. So I try to
Mhm.
embrace that and not, like, in my head, I'm like, she said everything else she said has been off the wall and confused, but she's not confused. She really does think I'm the best daughter in the whole wide world. You know, like that is something she's saying to me and letting me
Yeah.
know. And and one of the things I've also acknowledged, I think one of the biggest things you can do is just acknowledge that grief exists and you are experiencing it.
Mhm.
Like you said, you can, and you're going to feel it however you're going to feel it. It may come out like anger. It may come out like tears, combination of both. Like there's lots of different ways. But I think trying to pretend like we're not feeling sad or we're not feeling anger or denial, or like we have to accept that our loved one is going or gone. And then we also have to accept the grief that will come with it. It will come no matter what. And one of the things that my therapist, which I highly recommend therapy if you can afford, you know, if you can get it. But my therapist said, you know, you're doing such a great job, you know, processing this grief and understanding it. But just know that this grief does not replace the grief you will experience when your mom passes away.
It'll be different.
Which, of course, you know that intellectually, but it's almost like you think, well, if I do all this work now and I process all my grief now, then it'll be easier when she dies. And that's not the way it works. You know,
Right.
you're grieving something different here, and then you're going to grieve that there. And so I think that has helped me too. Right now, I can sense that I'm still pretty distant from it. Like I haven't really allowed myself to cry about her and what is happening as she declines. Part of that is because I have been on duty as a caregiver for 20
Mhm.
plus years, you know, and on and off since I was 8. So I've always been very like, what do we need to do? What's next? How do we do it? What is the answer? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to get mad at? Who do I file a report on? You know, all that kind of stuff.
It's as different as the caregiver role versus just being the daughter.
Right.
There's so much more. It's so much more complex. There's so many more things. Like you said, you got to kind of like do, and just get to the point and handle things.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that makes, you know, and I know this isn't a caregiving podcast, but for those caregivers who happen to be listening today, a lot of times we think we don't even consider ourselves caregivers. We just think whatever we're doing is just being a good daughter. And it's
Mhm.
like, that's a whole, like the caregiver role, especially in the way that I've had to fill it, and then other people whose, you know, mom or dad has had like a heart attack, a stroke, they've had to do some recovery, or they have a cancer diagnosis, or there's this dementia and all this kind of stuff. What you have to do as a caregiver is it is a separate role. And I think when we try to, what happens sometimes if we don't think of those two things as separate, we base our, like, how loving are we as a daughter on like how good the caregiving is. And sometimes it's like we're trying to do things as a caregiver that we have no control over. Like I had to come to grips with the fact that I'm not, no matter how much I do for my mom, I am not going to heal her. I am not going to make her any better. That's not my job. But I thought it was for a long time. And so when she would get worse, I wasn't doing a good enough job. Or if she didn't have what she needed, I wasn't doing a good enough job. And I had to come to a place where I could say, hey, I know that you need these things. I cannot, but I can only give you these things. I can't
Right.
do all the things that you need. We have to get some help. And that meant she had to go into a nursing home, which really sucked. But, we did the best we could for as long as we could. And that's kind of where we are now when we talk about how things are going now. It's like we did the best we could. Look at us. Look at how far we've
And
come.
that's all you can do, because sometimes it does get to the point where it's just so much, and the better 24/7 care is
Mm-hmm.
in a facility.
Yeah. Well, and I did my due diligence, obviously, there's, with that whole, like I said, that's a whole different podcast, that whole thing. But, there was a lot of guilt and shame and uncertainty. And is this the right thing? And is it the wrong thing? And what kind of daughter am I? And blah, blah, blah. And what kind of caregiver am I? But the bottom, I came to at the end of the day to say, of course we all want our parents to be happy. Like, but my job isn't to make her happy. My job is to keep her safe.
Yeah.
Now in our role of, in my caregiving role, I'm not trying to still, obviously I want her to be safe, but I'm not worried about how much ice cream she eats. And I'm not worried about
Yeah.
how much Diet Coke she drinks. Whereas, when we were trying to keep her as strong and healthy as possible, we were paying more attention to that. Whereas now it's like, you know what?
Have it all.
Let's have ice cream for breakfast. And so there is a little sense of more of the, now my job is, it's not necessarily to make her happy, but it's like, let's just do as much as we can to make her comfortable. If this, this is how we're going to do it. So
And let her enjoy it a little bit.
Right. So, and there's so much she can't do that it's, it's like trying to come up with the things that she can do. It's like, who do you want to visit? Who do you want to call? What fun food do you want to eat today?
Yeah. What do you want that you couldn't have before?
Right. So that's been kind of a fun thing, because I spent so much time telling everybody when they went to see her, don't bring her this or that. And now I'm like, just bring it. It's all fine. And they're like, what? We finally beat it into our heads. And I was like, just kidding. New plan. But anyway.
So you have taken all of this and created a business?
Yes. So about the time that right before everything, well, I guess it was the middle of last year, I really started thinking I had really been able to set up a relationship with my mom that protected her and helped her, but also helped me take care of myself, spend time with my family, enjoy life outside of caregiving. And for so long, I hadn't been able to do that. I was really burned out. And so I really tried to learn how to take care of myself and tend to my life as well as I tended to my mother's life. And so once I did that and really felt so much less guilt and overwhelm and, that just I didn't ever want to do anything with anybody when I had any time to myself, because I was just too tired and exhausted. And now I was kind of enjoying things outside of my caregiving role. And so I knew I could help other caregivers experience that same kind of relief. And so I started the Self-Caregiver with the idea of building a community where everybody that's a caregiver was invited, but in that space, you are not a caregiver, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So we know you're a caregiver. We know you're a great caregiver. We know you are doing the best job we can. But what I want to know is who are you? What are you doing today that you enjoy? Are you gardening? Are you painting? Are you running? Are you walking? Are you sleeping? Are you, binging Netflix murder mysteries? What are you doing for you? And if you can't figure out anything, then let's work on figuring out you beyond your caregiving role. And so that's what our community is about, just kind of fostering this idea of be you, figure out who that is, enjoy some time with yourself and for yourself every day. And if you can't figure that out, then I work with caregivers to help them set boundaries as a caregiver. I help them deal with complicated, complex conversations with their family, because a lot of caregivers are like, yeah, I would love a day off, but nobody's going to help me. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, I can help you work through some of that. And then, of course, when we get to the actual, like, okay, now I have some breathing room, I have some space. What am I supposed to do with it? Then I help caregivers figure out what they actually need in their self-care, like, like what do they actually need to do? Because a lot of caregivers, honestly, just need more sleep and probably to drink more water. Honestly, it's like you're probably dehydrated and really tired. But yeah, once we get those basics, then we talk about, you may not love the stress relieving technique that somebody shows you on Instagram, but what are some ways, let's find the way that works for you, because you have to have a way. And it may not
Mhm.
be doodling in the adult coloring book. It may be digging a hole in the dirt and planting a flower. Like, I don't know what it is for you, but I help you figure that out. That's what my role is. And so that's how I work with caregivers. Really, a huge chunk of it is like admitting that you need help, learning how to set boundaries and ask for help, and then learning how to sit in the discomfort when somebody's not happy with you.
Mhm.
And once you get through that huge thing, then you're like, oh, yeah, I am a person. I do have things I want to do with my life. Oh, I have children that I would like to see grow up and enjoy them. Yeah. So me, like my husband and I are, he's very busy in his company, and it's like I want to have time to be with him while we
Yeah.
can still do that, while we're still young and healthy enough to do that. And so that's why I created more time in my life. And that's what I help caregivers try to do in theirs.
Oh, that's very important. It's great because a lot of people just dive in, and I don't think we think about things like that. We just do what has to be done and keep trucking until you don't.
Well, and I will, there is something to be said for like, yeah, when like something drops in your lap that's like, oh gosh, this horrible thing happened. The whole family, like we come in and we're like, yeah, we're there 24/7. We got this round the clock at the hospital. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, you're going to miss some sleep. You're going to eat out of the vending machine. None of that's not the problem. The problem is when that becomes the way you live every day, because your person goes home and they're going to go home or go to and like you're still living on that. I got to be there. I got to do the thing. I got to, and you're not moving back into your kind of at capacity range. You're still working above that capacity. So I also teach like caregivers how to like manage, have your regular life as a caregiver that manageable for you, because there will be those emergency room calls. There will be that,
Mhm.
and if you're running on empty already, that's going to send you like, that's going to give you the flu. It's like what's going
Right.
to. So we want to be kind of in a place where we feel relatively balanced as far as, how our days go. And then that way, when we do have to crank it up into high gear, we have a little reserve left to have a few days of not enough sleep and wackadoo food and Diet Dr. Pepper, like
Right.
that's fine. That's not going to kill you. What's going to hurt you is the nonstop, not allowing yourself to come back down to a normal, with, like I say, within capacity, where like you're not getting to the end of every day feeling like a deflated balloon.
Mhm.
So I just came up with that analogy just right now, deflated balloon.
It works.
Like, I'm gonna go feeling like,
Yeah, that's it right there. Is there, before we wrap up, is there any advice or anything you would like to leave the listeners with?
well, I would love for anybody who's listening and like, oh crap, I'm dealing with this type of grief right now. I'm a caregiver, I'm exhausted, and I'm also grieving. Or maybe your caregiving journey is over, but you're still grieving and you want some help processing and getting through that. Come find me. My website is theselfcaregiver.com, but of course I'm also on Instagram. I'm on everywhere. I'm on all the places at the self caregiver, and I would love to connect with you there. I'm really active on Instagram. I share a lot of my stories about not only ways to handle caregiving, but grief, and also my personal journey as a caregiver for my mom. And so I'd love to connect with people over there at the self caregiver as well.
Perfect. And I will link all of that in the description too, so that everybody has easy access to that. And Jeanette, I thank you for sharing with us today. It's very helpful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for what you're doing to help people who are grieving. Grief sucks.
It does. Thank you.
We're going to get through it anyway. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation today. If you would like to join us on Facebook, you can find us at Grief Sucks Life After Loss on Facebook. And if you would like to share your story with us, you can email us at griefsuckslifeafterloss@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing you again.